Chapter 12 really focuses in on strategic implementation and what it takes from a CEO and from other top managers to implement strategic change, a new strategy, etc. An analogy you can make between a person and an organization is to look at like biology and whenever you're learning to do something new, taking on a new challenge. Let's say you want to run, let's say a half marathon. I can't even get my head around a full marathon, but let's say you want to run a half marathon. You've got to make certain changes. You've got to start working out, right? There's have to be changes that occur to your cardiovascular system. Maybe some muscles, for running long distances, the muscles don't show too much, but there are muscles you have to develop for that. Um, and so, that's structural changes. You also have to learn how to run properly, right? And you have to, have, be committed to good form and basically also kind of the different ways that your body moves in order to efficiently run a half marathon. If you don't know those things, you've got to learn those. Let's say you've never run much at all before in any way, and so you're going from a couch to half marathon. You're going to have to learn to actually run. And then, the biggest hurdle for most people would be the culture part, the psychology part of getting yourself psyched up to be able to do that, right? Changing your attention, changing your goals, changing what you want, right? And so you might think, hey, it's a good idea for me to run a half marathon for fitness, for sense of purpose, etc. But unless you internalize, unless you actually your heart actually wants it, right? Unless you're psychologically invested in it, you're going to have a hard time doing it. All right. So that's kind of like a new strategic initiative. When there's a new strategic initiative, the structure, processes, and culture all have to change. And a lot of times those are the biggest steps, right? Formulating the strategy is nothing compared to these three things. So the reason that leaders are so well compensated is not because they're good at coming up with new strategies, although that's part of it. There's a lot of skills they have to have, but leadership and implementing strategies is really important. There have been some studies that have shown that companies that are good at formulating strategy and implementing strategy are the top performers. They're like they surveyed top managers in the organization and they asked them to rate themselves on items related to coming up with a new strategy, creating a strategy, and then other items on implementing a strategy. And both of those are related to overall performance. But it turns out that the implementation portion is far more important than formulation. And so the ranking went, if you're good at both, those are the top performers. But there's only a small gap between companies that said that and companies that said, hey, we're not that great at formulating, but we're really good at implementing our strategy for their performance. And then there's a larger gap down to companies that say, we're really good at coming up with a great strategy, but implementation is not really our strong suit. And they tend to be much lower than the inverse of that. And then finally, of course, at the bottom is companies that say they aren't good at either one. Strategic leadership is important. This is why CEOs make the big bucks. All right. So what do effective strategic leaders have to do in terms of skill? Information processing is huge. They have to understand the complexity of an ambiguous situation, kind of take it all in, understand their situation. They've got to cope with change and uncertainty. You're not dealing always with a world of facts. You can't always find data to show you what you need to do next. It's great if you can find data. You should look for data, but a lot of times there's too much change. There's too many moving parts, and you've got to do your best to cope with that, even if you can't take it all in. You need to make candid, courageous, and pragmatic decisions, not self-centered decisions aimed at making yourselves look good, but kind of humble decisions where you take stock of the situation, do the right thing, even if it's unpopular. All right, understand how decisions are going to affect the internal systems in the firm. That's what we've been talking about. How are those, how is the structure, how are the processes, how are the culture impacted by the decision, and how will they impact the implementation of the decision? You've got to positively influence the thoughts and behaviors of your subordinates, right? So there's a lot of leadership and interpersonal stuff going on. You've got to develop strong partners internally and externally to facilitate execution of your vision. You can't be an island, right? You've got to rely on others, rely on your network to help you get where you need to go. All right. And then you've got to manage the firm's entire operations effectively, right? You've got to see the whole puzzle, right? You've got to see everything and manage the operation in its entirety. In the next presentation, the final presentation of the course, which is gap analysis, which is going to be by Dr. Josh Aaron, the same instructor that gave you the chapter 10 information based on his huge expertise in that area. He talks about gap analysis, and a lot of the aspects of gap analysis are covered by this model. But how do managers make decisions? They need to take into account aspects of the external environment, aspects of the internal environment. So in other words, those things that are reflected in a SWOT analysis. And then his or her characteristics come into play, right? So tolerance for ambiguity, commitment to the firm and its desired strategic outcomes, interpersonal skills, aspirational level, degree of self-confidence. All of those are going to determine whether the discretion and decision of the manager can be, if he or she can actually carry those things out. All right, top management teams are those managers that surround the CEO. They're the key managers like the VP of finance, right? The VP of marketing, all of the different functions, or it could be divided, geographically or with product leaders, etc. But they're the key managers who are responsible for selecting and implementing the firm's strategy. These are the people that, together with the CEO, are coming up with the strategy. All right. Heterogeneous top management teams may have difficulty functioning effectively as a team. It's shown that when they have similar characteristics, that there is kind of more collegiality, and they can actually implement existing strategy, it's been shown, better. However, heterogeneous management teams have some big advantages. They can be associated with innovation and strategic change, different ways of thinking, having different backgrounds and different functions, and I mean, it can be business background, it can be ethnic background, it can be a lot of different things. But those different backgrounds that they bring to the table, when that's there, when those different perspectives are there, it's mainly cognitive diversity that matters, not external diversity. When those things are there, you're going to see a lot of innovation and strategic change. They force the team to think outside the box and be more creative. That's kind of what the research shows. And they're more likely to recognize environmental changes that may impact the firm. And there's some tentative research on that third one. So there are some advantages to a homogeneous top management team that are kind of related more to maybe a cost leadership strategy. And a heterogeneous top management team may be more effective for differentiation. I would say, actually the content of who those are is a lot more important than the diversity level per se.